What is up, Brad fans? How you doing? How you living? Hopefully very well. Thank you so much for being here for this episode. It is a really good one. I know I say that all the time, but this is also an extra important one because my guest today, David Poses, is a writer, activist, and speaker, and he has a very important message about drugs, something we've talked about on this podcast before. And his message is to distill it down. Basically, the entire system that we have created to deal with drugs, from prevention to treatment to policy, is whack. It's out of line in terms of actually helping people and reducing harm, reducing death, reducing suffering. He brings us this message through his upcoming book called The Weight of Air, which will be available July 6th. You can pre-order it now anywhere you get books, where he recounts his story of living for decades a double life, addicted to heroin, struggling with mental illness, depression, and coming to grips with that, coming to terms with that as a father, as a husband, as a person. He now is writing in places such as the LA Times, Washington Post, Undark Magazine, doing podcasts like this one to promote this book and promote this message that is, again, based on, you couldn't base it on, a better story. He's lived it. He's been there. So it's a really interesting conversation. Powerful book. I got a chance to get an advanced copy of it, and yes, really, really important. He talks about how our policy, basically, and our attitudes and our treatment of addiction is basically to shame addicts and try and shame them out of these behaviors, when really the root cause of a lot of these behaviors is mental illness. It's trying to numb pain. So if we have a more compassionate, empathetic view of addiction, of mental illness, we might be able to actually change our policy to actually help people. So I want to thank David again for coming on the show. I really, really enjoyed speaking to him. He's a great speaker. He puts things in terms that are very clear and very powerful when you hear them. And he's a great writer. I'm really enjoying his book. So you can find out more about David and his book, The Weight of Air, at davidposes.com. That's Poses. He's on Twitter at David the Kick, Instagram at David_the_kick, and davidposes.author on Facebook. You can get links to all of the social media channels directly from davidposes.com. And yeah, do give him a follow. Check out what he's doing. Check out The Weight of Air when it becomes available. You can pre-order it. I can, again, vouch for it. It's definitely worth the read. And hopefully David comes back. Maybe we'll have him back in the future as the book release gets closer, and we can talk more about this, because yeah, really, we had a limited amount of time, and there's still so many different issues that we could discuss. So this conversation was a really great overview of his story, his message, but it's really just the beginning, hopefully, of the conversation. So I hope you enjoy that conversation. As always, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 2brad4u. You can send us an email. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you want to hear about. Let us know how you felt about what you heard. 2brad4u@gmail.com. And you can leave us a voice message, which we will listen to and play on the show. Speakpipe.com/2brad4u. All of this is also available on our website, 2brad4u.wordpress.com. Please rate, subscribe, follow wherever you're getting your podcasts. It does help us get visibility, does help more ears come to the show. And for a message like this one, delivered by David Poses, the more ears, the better. So that's it for me right now. Please enjoy my conversation with author, speaker, activist David Poses. David, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate you joining us for this episode. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent, excellent. You're in New York, correct?
I'm in New York. Yep.
just real quick before we get started, how is it there? How are things there? It's New York was one of the places that I hear different things about how they're handling with the pandemic. Is it good? Is it bad? How are people doing? What's the mood?
Yeah, I mean, people are definitely sick of it. It seems to be getting better. I think I don't really leave my house all that much since the pandemic started, so I don't know.
Yeah.
It's nice outside today.
Yeah. Well, and I see you got all the guitars and stuff back there, so you got stuff to keep you busy, so that's good.
If only I knew how to play them, that would really be something.
All right. Well, again, yeah, thanks for coming on the show and for sharing your story. And it really is an amazing story, a difficult story, I'm sure, to tell and relive. But one of the messages I think that it highlights, and this is kind of where I'd like to start, is that there seems to be, to me, a shift that's kind of happening in attitudes toward addiction, where we're kind of starting to realize that addiction is really kind of a symptom of another problem. Usually, in a lot of cases, it's mental illness, depression, things like that. And when we view it that way, maybe that changes how we view addiction and how we view treatment and stuff like that. We can get into all that, but maybe you can just sort of give us the condensed version of your history to this point, and kind of highlighting that sort of message that I think your story lets us know about.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I struggled with depression since early childhood. Before I even, depression, the word entered my, vocabulary. I knew something was terribly wrong. I mean, my mom used to ask, why are you so sad? Don't you want to be happy? And I knew I didn't want to be sad. I didn't know how not to be sad. I didn't know how to talk about it. I was just, full of shame. Um, my parents got divorced when I was 3 or 4. Mom started taking me to therapy. I was too ashamed of depression to even talk about my bad feelings. My therapist figured it out anyway. They prescribed antidepressants. I mean, to make a long story short, by the time I was 16, I had tried every antidepressant that you could try. Nothing lifted the depression. Some of them made things worse or brought on new symptoms that they were all deal breakers. I tried alcohol, and pot when my friends, started experimenting with that stuff, and I couldn't stand the feeling of being fucked up.
Hmm. Hmm.
I just didn't like it. I totally didn't get the appeal. But in 5th grade, this cop came to my school for a drug prevention assembly, and he explained all of the substances and why you shouldn't use them. Um, you can't drive a car if you drink alcohol. Pot makes you stupid. Cocaine makes you angry. And everything sounded like I don't want anything to do with that. And when he got to heroin, he said it was the worst drug. It was originally a painkiller, and it makes you not have any feelings. And of course, he said that like it was a bad thing, and I heard this is the solution to my problems. So as I got older, and my friends were using the gateway drugs, heroin. I'm from New York, but in the suburbs, like half an hour or so outside of the city, and you couldn't find heroin anywhere. And I really looked for it. I finally tracked it down when I was 16, and back then there wasn't an opioid crisis. We're talking about the 90s. So heroin was this like hardcore drug off to the side of everything else. I didn't realize that opioid is a category of drugs. So like heroin is to Vicodin as beer is to whiskey. So you know um, uh, it didn't give me that. I mean, I got drunk once in my life, and I hated it. With heroin, it was just relief. I mean, it was a painkiller. My feelings were okay. Like everything was okay. And so, I certainly knew that it was dangerous and, illegal and immoral and, all that kind of business, but it was the only thing that made me feel good. So, I went and pursued it. As much as I could. And I mean, when you're talking about the how we view addiction, I it's definitely a symptom, for me of depression. No question. I think that's the case for everybody else. I mean, if each type of substance has a different effect on us, we use them for a different reason. So, painkillers kill pain. And that's how opioids work. I mean, they target your opiate receptors. Like it couldn't be clearer. But in our, kind of preconceived notions about addiction and drugs, we have this idea that well, if you're using drugs, like drugs are causing your pain, and we blame everything on drugs. And so it's kind of this inverse model of what it actually is. Like if you were prescribed heroin, morphine, whatever for after knee surgery, nobody in their right mind would be like, oh, well, clearly the morphine is causing your knee problems. If you stop taking it, the only way you're going to feel better. Like, it doesn't make sense. But I hated all of the lying and the breaking the law, and yeah, I mean everything that goes along with illegal drugs, the danger, the risks. And so after a couple of years, I didn't want to do it anymore, and I wanted to feel okay. I told my parents. They sent me to a rehab, one of the best rehabs in the country. And when I got there, they did all of the AA business with me. You have a disease and all this stuff, and just none of it made any sense. And when you look at addiction, the medical issue, right? Like it's very clear your body is addicted to this thing, right? So the idea that sobriety is the antidote to addiction, for a while I railed against that, but what I've come to realize is that's actually true. You stop taking drugs, you are sober, your addiction is over, right?
Hmm.
Sobriety is not the cure for compulsive drug use. That's the actual problem. And so we're trying to cure a compulsive behavior with sobriety, which is not the answer. Again, you have your knee surgery, you take the morphine, you're addicted to morphine. Sobriety is not going to solve your knee problem. It's going to
Hmm.
solve your addiction to the morphine, right? So, but I'm saying, some archaic version of this thought, at 19 in rehab, and I'm a teenager. I just, lied to everybody in my life for 3 years. And you've got these experts who have absolutely no medical qualifications who are preaching this program that is, really not all that dissimilar to how we looked at bubonic plague in the, Middle Ages of like, well, you just pray. And if God wants you to live, then you're in business. I knew that it sounded a lot like quack medicine. Um, and look, I mean, if it works for you, that's great. I never want to discourage anybody from anything that works. But it was offensive to me. Um, you know, but for my mom, who is being told by these experts, he's lying. This is how it works. This is his addiction talking. You got to get the hand sanitizer out of the house. He's going to drink it if he gets desperate enough for a high. And I'm explaining this to my mom, and she's like, everything you're saying is making perfect sense. But what if you're wrong? And it's like, I mean, I have two kids now. If anybody told me that, my kids were going to die, like, of course I'm going to listen to them. So I get it. So I got kicked out of rehab for making out with this girl. And they sent me to, this tough love ultimatum to a halfway house. And to make a long story short, I knew that I was going to relapse. I mean, the depression wasn't cured. They told me in rehab, depression's an excuse. Addiction is your problem. You're an addict. All this stuff that was just crazy. Um, and so, at the end of the day, I couldn't live with this feeling. Like I wanted to die. I mean, I was suicidal, and I didn't have a choice. I couldn't function feeling the way that I was feeling. It was just an untenable situation. So it was like holding my breath. I mean, I went as long as I could without it because I didn't want to hurt anybody and be an addict and all that kind of business. But back to the knee surgery, it's like, in a flare up, what are you going to do? You're going to call your doctor and say, hey, look, I think, this is a problem and whatever. And, so I went out and spent, a dozen years relapsing, from relapse to relapse. And when I was on heroin, I was able to function. Everything was fine. I built a successful career. I got married. Life was great. When I was sober, I lost jobs. I couldn't, function. It was brutal. And then I found buprenorphine when I was 32. I had actually known about it since before I tried heroin in the early 90s. There were clinical trials for buprenorphine in New York. My best friend who gave me heroin the first time was one of the first clinical trial people, and some of his friends were as well. So, but I thought that it was for withdrawal, like that it eases the withdrawal symptoms. I didn't realize it was a maintenance drug. So I got on buprenorphine at 32, and I still, I mean, this whole time I led everybody in my life to believe that, I stopped using it at 18 before rehab and never looked back. So as far as the book goes, to put that in context, it means that nobody in my life was aware of anything that happened from the first page of the book.
Whoa.
Whoa. Yeah. So there's like, a couple of sentences and then it's all, brand new information. I hadn't told my wife, I didn't tell anybody. And then as the opioid crisis started to, get more attention in the news and, all the OxyContin stuff was going on. I mean, I saw this coming from a mile away. Depression rates are skyrocketing. Everybody's miserable. Everybody's anxious. Everybody has trauma. Antidepressants work for, roughly 50% of people who use them. We're talking about painkillers. People are in pain. They're going to take them. And so I saw all this misinformation in the world, and I was so ashamed and so miserable. And I realized that, I'm like actively sabotaging every change that I want to see in the world by pretending that this didn't happen. And my wife and I were together for 18 years. We had two young kids. And it reached a point where I lost so many friends to overdose. And I thought, like, I have to say something. I couldn't keep my mouth shut anymore. And I mean, I was very lucky that she was as compassionate and understanding as she was. Um, and I certainly, know her very well and love her and know that that's all true. But I fully expected that she was going to be like, get the fuck out of here. I never want to see you again. You've betrayed me, like as if I'd
Mm-hmm.
been there. And so, her understanding and acceptance made it easier to open up to other people. I had written the book before I told her. I mean, basically, the idea was I've always, had some kind of writing project going on, so it was like, I'm just going to give it to her and be like, here it is, Um, and so, as I started opening up and was well received, the book turned into a, maybe I should do something with this. So it was kind of just, parallel tracks. And here we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, it makes sense to me when you explain it in these terms, and like I said, kind of off the top, I feel like there is a shift in the attitudes in people kind of coming around to this idea that it's not this sort of that the drug is just like, you take this drug once and you're going to become an addict, and then it goes out. Do you feel like that shift is happening as well? Because I mean, I'm coming at it from like very little experience. I know I have a few people in my life that deal with mental illness, depression kind of thing. They appear to be doing okay. I've never really dealt with addiction or anything like that. So, as sort of an outsider coming at it, like, how do you feel the conversation is changing? Do you feel like there's progress being made in that
I
area?
do. I'm actually, I'm stunned. And for I think what I'm noticing is, when I talk to people and explain it, I mean, my views and experience, like, I'm not some unique individual here. I mean, this is the norm.
Hmm.
The junkie stereotype, it's just, it's bullshit. Um, and so I really expected to get a lot of pushback and a lot of like, well, that can't really be true, or is it really like this, or even just a little bit of something. I of course I've had people send me Twitter messages or whatever and say you're a crazy asshole and I hope you die. But anybody that I've interacted with, like 100% of people are get it.
Hmm.
Even if they went into the conversation feeling the exact opposite, they get it. And it seems like the sentiment out in the world, um, more people realize that it's not bad people go out and decide to do drugs because you can break the law every day. I mean, when you really look at it, there's just no logic in society's notion of what this really is. Like when you think about what it is, like it makes more sense that a painkiller that has been in use longer than written language that only has one use to kill pain is being used by people who are hurting. Like that makes more sense than like crazy assholes go out and use this stuff because they're just, want to hurt people. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that like we know that nobody wakes up in the morning and starts guzzling booze all day and functions. Like we know that. There's millions of people all over the world that are prescribed all kinds of opioids, and we not only know that they can function on them, we know that they need these drugs specifically to function. So we don't question that. You have your knee surgery, you're taking your morphine. Thank God you have it. You wouldn't be able to get out of bed otherwise. But then we meet somebody on heroin. We're like, how the hell do you do that? Well, it doesn't really add up. If you know that people can take morphine for the knee pain, then you know that people can take heroin for the head pain. Um, and it's the same with all of the I've been very talking about legalization out in the world. I think like we have this idea that of course alcohol is safe, it's legal. Why would it be otherwise? And the science behind it is very clear. It's the most dangerous thing you can put in your body. It's more addictive. You can die in withdrawal with alcohol. Alcohol is made less dangerous because it is legal. Like that's the difference. And so people are dying of heroin overdoses because you have no idea what's in this bag of dope. And so if one bag is 10 times stronger than the one before it, like you're dead. If you pour, you're drinking beer. I know I can drink a beer, no problem. I'm not going to get sick. And then there's grain alcohol in your beer, like you're done. You're just dead.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not going to happen. And so it's like this idea of like, oh well, drugs are dangerous and they're that's why they're illegal and they're going to kill you, and legalization leads to widespread use. Like I can. There's booze all over the place. Like you can go to the supermarket, the gas station, everywhere you go. Like the whole world doesn't load up on beer every time they're out of their house because it's legal. So like we disprove all of our preconceived ideas that these axioms that they have to be true. Like and we're out in the world living debunking them every day. And then when you actually point it out to somebody, they're like, holy shit, you're absolutely right. I don't buy beer everywhere I go. Yeah, I wouldn't become a meth user if meth was legal, whatever. I think it's really just people are more open-minded, and it's really just it's the way that you explain it. Like the old argument of like pot should be legal, it's not bad for you, and I shouldn't get arrested for buying weed. Like when you put it that way, there's people, well, I don't like pot, and so it shouldn't be legal, and I don't really care. But when you say, look, the leading cause of death in the United States right now is accidental overdose. Overdose is a matter of potency. It's not I took too much of this stuff. It was too strong, right? So if you don't know how strong it is, you can't prevent overdose. Like you just can't. It's the bottle of grain alcohol again. You don't know what's in the bottle, like you're fucked. And that's why people are dying. It's not about carelessness. It's not about you didn't measure it properly. There's no unit of measure. And so that's why people are dying. And if we wanted to save lives, like during Prohibition, people were dying from alcohol overdose left and right. It's not just the unregulated market. It's the grain alcohol in the bottle thing all over again. And so it's the humane thing. And this idea that like drug use is immoral, drug users are bad people, all that kind of business. Like, so you're saying drug users deserve to die because that's the moral thing to do? Like these arguments, they invalidate themselves. And, people are smart, and you just have to listen to it for a minute, and you know that it's insane what we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it's amazing because it is like even, you know, I was in high school in the late 90s, early 2000s, and there was still that message, of it's the substances problem. We demonize certain substances, but yet we allow other ones, like, alcohol, like you mentioned, is ubiquitous everywhere. And it's like a rite of passage, right? In our culture, when you turn 18, I'm living here now in Germany. I'm originally from Canada. I'm here in Germany. Alcohol is, it's everywhere. And kids, are introduced to it at a younger age here. Like it's not as taboo, right? So you see this different relationship with it, right? So I think that, that the idea, like you've pointed out, that yeah, we're changing the view of like bad substance, good substance, rather to just like all substances, harmful use, controlled use, this kind of thing, right? But then I also think that there's been a recent, and maybe you could speak to this as well, because you know this is what we're talking about as the root of this addiction thing, is mental illness. I think there has been a changing in conversation around mental illness as well. And again, thankfully I haven't had to deal with this, very, very deeply in my life, but it feels like there's a bigger recognition that it's not just, "Oh, you're sad, get over it," kind of thing. But it's still, I think it's still a slippery thing for a lot of people to understand, because it isn't like the wound that you can watch it heal, you can, feel better and that kind of thing. And I know there's a lot of people that, when you're dealing with someone who, either you have mental illness or someone in your life has mental illness, it doesn't make sense. The behaviors don't make sense. You see someone, maybe be destructive, with trying to self-medicate and stuff like that, and it's this, like, what how do you kind of reconcile that, or how do you speak to people about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's it made sense to me the first time when my psychiatrist explained it as a distortion. So I see the world as, everybody hates me and I'm a terrible person and I can't do anything right, and you're going to find out in 5 minutes, and whatever. Um, that's my distorted view, right? um, and so when you're able to kind of step outside of that lens and go like, okay, maybe everybody doesn't see me as this terrible person, maybe I'm not, and maybe there's some worthwhile, redeeming virtue, that's very helpful. But the kind of, the bad thoughts, for lack of a better word, it's like, I mean, we know that you can't will, physical, pain away, right? Like, your knee surgery will just snap out of it and I'll be fine, um, but with emotional, maladies, you should be able to snap out of it. I should be able to be okay. I have so much to be happy for. Why am I so miserable? So we kind of pile on that guilt. And yes, I think it's shifting, but it's still very hard to understand from the outside because it doesn't even make sense from the inside. So, I don't know how to, reconcile that, I guess. But I think there is more, of at least an awareness that it's not what I think it is, or they can't control it. I mean, who's going to choose to be miserable if you don't have to be? Like, I mean, come on. It's just that it's that logic again.
Hmm.
And I think also some of, that is reinforced by the things that, people who are struggling say and do. And I'm certainly not, blaming anyone, or myself, but I know that, for years, by pretending that I wasn't depressed, I'm reinforcing the idea that it's something to be ashamed of and I shouldn't be, and, whatever. I mean, I'm obviously not going to walk out of my house in my bathrobe and start complaining about, everything. But, and it's similar with drugs. Like, what I said to you before about the way heroin made me feel. I couldn't say that out loud until, a couple of years ago. I would tell people, if anybody knew about, my past, it's pure evil and it's terrible, and, all this stuff. By doing that, I'm invalidating the reason that I used it. Right? If it's pure evil, then it did nothing for me, and, why did I use it? So that idea of like, you know, uh, you've got to stop and it's going to kill you and it's terrible and all that kind of stuff. Nobody ever says, why are you using this stuff? What's it doing for you? What are you trying to, pave over, feel better? Like, what's actually going on here? Because in the absence of that, then it's very easy to go, well, you got to just stop. This is terrible. It's not doing anything for you. Look at all this pain. You're killing your family and yourself, and, blah, blah, blah. So like, that was kind of the one thing that, like, I mean, it's not necessarily reconciling it, but to, I wish that question was asked more, you know?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, it seems obvious when we talk about it, and I love the way that you put it, that we're debunking all of these things every day with our behaviors and things like that. um so uh, how did you then, come to deal with the depression? Because, like you said, like, antidepressants work for like 50% of people, and this is like a whole other area of science study this like brain chemistry and psychiatry. And I recently just did a podcast for Undark magazine, looking at the new psychedelic movement for treatment and of depression and things like that. And one of the things that struck me, again, as someone that was not in this world until taking an interest and taking a look at it through this lens, was that we think of drugs and clinical trials. Oh, you can just take a drug and be better, like with pain and stuff like this. But therapy doesn't work that way. There's not even really a great way for science to sort of say, well, this therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, is better than psychoanalysis or something like that. Like, it's such a personal thing, and there's like so many variables that go into it. So I'm just kind of curious as to sort of your experience. Obviously, it's not going to speak to everyone's experience, but I think that's an important part of this. Is if not just numbing the pain with drugs,
Right.
what?
Yeah. I mean, I think some aspects of my experience are more universal in terms of the buprenorphine, at least, because I mean, if you look at the way that opioids work, right? So like you've got your opiate receptors, and they regulate emotional well-being and pain, right? Um, so opioids work by flooding your brain with dopamine and serotonin and binding to your opiate receptors. Um, and so you feel less pain, you feel less emotional, physical, same thing. They don't know or care why you're using them. That's just what they do. We have this idea that like, oh, you can't use them for depression, they only work for physical pain, but they work exactly the same for both. So with the buprenorphine, it targets your the mu receptors, which are more, I guess, in charge of your emotional well-being, and so they provide that level of saturation that you need to push down the emotional pain, to kind of get past the distortion. I mean, whatever analogy and metaphor you want to use, it breaks that pain down. It's a warm blanket on whatever's hurting you, and it's not going to be the same for physical pain. There's people out there that go like, well, it's the same as heroin. It's really not. I mean, ask for it the next time you sprain your ankle, and you'll find out. But for those of us who are using painkillers to kill emotional pain, which I mean, I've read that it's somewhere around 95%. I want to say that it's closer to 100, but that's still not zero. So with the buprenorphine, that's what it does. It's not as strong as heroin or OxyContin or any of that stuff. But if you go into it with this, I'm just going to be sober and that's fine and that's what I need or whatever, again, you're not solving the depression. So like the buprenorphine, um, if sobriety was like holding my breath, right? So buprenorphine was, snorkel or a lifeboat or whatever you want to say. I couldn't get to therapy if I couldn't breathe. If I'm like drowning in the ocean and dog paddling. So with the buprenorphine, I was able to get to therapy and start to unpack the emotional baggage that led to the heroin in the first place. Um, you know, Depression is a degenerative biological issue, so it's not like anything I do is going to make it completely go away. It's really just managing it. The buprenorphine allows me to breathe. The weekly sessions with my therapist, it's like sometimes I feel like this is crazy and I'm going nowhere. And then, I mean, I had these like two major eureka moments in the past few weeks that I was like, holy shit, I can't believe that, that doesn't happen all the time. But even with that, it's like, I'm me. And so I could tell you exactly what happened. And you might be like, well, so what? I already knew that. Or like, I don't care. So everybody is different, but I think that's the other piece of this, is that like we are looking, we think there's some universal solution. We're looking for this, like do these 10 things and you'll be okay, or this is just what works. That's AA's motto, it works. And the fact is, like, nothing works like that in the world under any circumstances. Everything, so why would this be different? And but that's really what it is. It's the I have more tools now to deal with the bad. I have more awareness of what's causing it, and how to work around it, how to manage it, all that kind of stuff. I've got the warm blanket of buprenorphine. I mean, I went into it thinking, I've been on it for 13 years, and I went into it thinking like I won't be on this forever. But you know what? Like I need this,
Hmm.
um, and I was, kind of like shamed by my doctor into weaning off a couple of years ago, and that was a huge, mistake. I mean, I didn't come off entirely, but as I went down, it was clear that like this is a bad move. And we know that like with diabetes, you wouldn't tell somebody, well, when are you going to stop taking the insulin? Clearly, your diabetes is under control. Like we don't, nobody would even think to ask that question. But we pack so much shame into drug. You should be okay without anything. Why do you need this stuff? It's like, you know what? Look, if you're taking painkillers for your emotional pain and you haven't entirely healed it because it's degenerative and biological, well then guess what? You need this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's the some drugs are good, some drugs are bad, or like this idea that we you have to be perfect without anything, right? Like that's the goal, right? Is just to be substance free, I guess, and perfectly happy, and all of this stuff, and it's kind of this like it gets put on this pedestal, but in reality nobody is that. Even the people that casually drink or something, like like how many times do people say like, oh, I had a tough day at work, I'm gonna have a beer, or I'm gonna have a drink, or even a cup of tea,
You're right.
technically is
That's right.
some kind of a drug.
Yeah.
uh, just to jump back to the buprenorphine, see, because
Yeah.
I was, I did a little bit of reading on it before coming to this podcast, and I was curious, yeah, to as to exactly how it works and what it was, because the websites I kind of found and stuff like that were kind of putting it in the same, there was buprenorphine and there was methadone and like these other things, but it's really not like methadone. Like methadone is like meant to manage withdrawal, correct?
No, well, methadone is a full opioid agonist. So methadone is to heroin as scotch is to bourbon.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, well, no, methadone is a synthetic opioid. Heroin is an opiate, so it's a naturally occurring, non-synthetic drug.
Right.
But I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's Scotch and whiskey, or Scotch and bourbon. It's the same thing. It's a matter of potency. They're spelled differently,
Yeah.
but they're basically the same. So buprenorphine is it's a partial opioid. It's a partial agonist. So it doesn't have the like warm fuzzy feelings can get through with buprenorphine. I guess
Okay.
is really what it is.
But
And
it's not, I guess my question is kind of like, it is still sort of, it's supplying in a way what the opiate, what the heroin, for example, was, but in a sort of toned down
right.
version.
Yeah, it's I mean anything whether it's a partial agonist or full, it's saturating your receptors. So like if you've got this a football field of grass and it rains, they're saturated, right? If it doesn't rain, then they're dry and they're going like we need water.
Hmm.
And so for people who um, start taking painkillers and feel like they can operate better on them when it rains, you need that water. Are there people who are just doing it to party or because they're bad people? I mean, I don't think so, but okay, maybe there are. For the rest of us, if your pain, if you can get past your pain and live comfortably, without the buprenorphine. Hey, great, good for you. I mean, look, I wish I could wake up every day and not have to take anything. That would be awesome. I can't. I know that. I mean, my vision is bad, so I wear glasses. Like, if I'm not going to be ashamed about that, then I have no reason to be ashamed about the buprenorphine. I mean, my a couple of relatives and friends. When are you going to stop taking that crap? Like, never. I'm just not. I
Yeah.
mean, you know,
Yeah, no, no, it makes sense. I just wanted to, yeah, like understand exactly how that works for for the people that if someone is listening who is struggling with something like this, to know that this is an option. And then I guess my question would be like, it's not something that I had heard of until the press, your press folks got in touch with me about your book and everything, and I was looking at that and just being like, oh, I didn't even realize, I had heard of methadone, I had heard of like kind of antidepressants, these other things. I didn't even realize that this was an option.
yeah.
What is the sort of I guess status of it. We'll talk about it, the American context, I guess, but like this is something you get a prescription from your doctor.
Yeah.
It's
It's really, I mean, it's being mismanaged in such a disgusting way right now in America. So any any physician can prescribe any full opioid agonist for, they can just write you a prescription of fentanyl, no problem. 7% of U.S. doctors have what's called an X waiver, which is the special thing that you need to prescribe buprenorphine. So everybody can prescribe something that will kill you. 7% can prescribe something that won't, that will save you from the things that will kill you, right? Um, and there's so much stigma involved in it that even among those who can prescribe it, I mean, I've met more people than I can count who had a kid who was on buprenorphine, wanted to move to some sober living home. It's an AA based rehab place is telling you like you got to get off that. You need to be pure and clean and not on anything. And then they wean them off, and then they die of overdose, and it's really very sad. So the Biden administration recently made a change that any physician now can prescribe buprenorphine to up to it's either 10 or 30 people. That sounds great when you read that headline. The problem is, my primary physician, who is a perfectly nice guy, and I've known him for a very long time, if I go in there and I go, hey, I need buprenorphine, give it to me, that doesn't mean that he wants to prescribe it. And so doctors, I mean, I hate to make generalizations, but like, if you're a plastic surgeon, like, do you want all the junkies banging down your door for buprenorphine? Probably not. If you're a Doctors Without Borders guy, like, so there's 1.5 million physicians in the United States right now. Of that 1.5 million, there's 1,183 are certified in addiction medicine. So if there's 20 million people struggling with opioid addiction, it's roughly one doctor for every 18,875. Like, it's untenable.
mm-hmm,
And you can get it now with telemedicine. I mean, there's pharmacies are allowed to, they have discretion to not dispense whatever they feel like not. I mean, I like to think I'm reasonably articulate. Not a horrifying, presenting person in a drugstore. I've had situations where, it's a controlled substance. Um, I was traveling. I was going on a work trip. I went to. This has happened, dozens of times over the past 13 years. I'm picking it up one day early, 12 hours early, whatever it is. And I had a drugstore that threatened to call the DEA if I didn't, leave. And it's like, I'm taking this to avoid the bad drugs, and you're not giving it to me. So what do you
mm-hmm,
think?
mm-hmm.
Um,
What's the reason behind? Is it just the physicians just don't know about it, or is there some kind of like, I'm assuming like all drugs, there's side effects, but it doesn't sound like it's an overly dangerous substance.
it's not overly dangerous. I mean, the partial agonist, it's self-limiting. It has a ceiling effect. You're not going to die. It doesn't have any long-term side effects. Doesn't have any short-term side effects. It's really just ignorance and stigma. And the other thing is it's available in only a third of rehabs, although it might be more now in treatment centers because the predominant model is the faith and abstinence based, which believes that anything other than Tylenol, Advil, and so forth means you're not sober. It invalidates your sobriety. So according to those guys, I might as well be on all kinds of drugs right now because I'm on buprenorphine. I mean, I think I'm functioning fairly well. I don't feel like I'm some crazy fucked up intoxicated person right now. But that's how they feel. So they make it. I shouldn't say they make it very hard, but there's a lot of shame in asking for it, in getting it, and there's a lot of providers who will tell you, you really only should be on it for this amount of time because you don't need it. It's part of your addiction. You got to be clean and sober, and all that kind of business. And I mean, it's back to like, what are you doing this for in the first place? If you're taking it for emotional pain and that hasn't been healed, and you take it for a week, a month, whatever, but you haven't healed the wound, what's going to happen when you stop? Like, pain doesn't stop when you stop taking opioids; it gets worse.
Mm-hmm,
So it's like that logic that's just kind of absent from the conversation, and I think a lot of people, buy into it. I mean, I certainly did. I was on it for 10 years when my doctor said, "You don't need this crap anymore. You've been on it for 10 years. Everything's under control. Stop." you know.
Mhm.
And so we started weeding down. It was very clear that it was a bad move. But I thought,
Yeah.
like, why? Like, I shouldn't have to take this stuff. Everything's okay now. It wasn't. And so I went back on. But there's a lot of shame in that. I
Mhm.
want to be free of this. I shouldn't need it. Whatever. So I think for me, like, I don't want to say like I'm more knowledgeable than the next guy, but like I've kind of I'm so aware of the shame that's baked into it that, like, you'd think if anybody was going to stand up to their doctor, like, I would be the kind of person who would do that. And the fact that it didn't even occur to me to do that is like, what does that tell you about the state of affairs?
Mhm.
Like that
Mhm.
like I'm out in the world screaming about this stuff, and it didn't even occur to me to do that. Is like, I mean, it's embarrassing, but it's also, it shows how strong that is. I mean, I had this thought many years ago when I was in a really black hole of depression before I was on buprenorphine, and I was thinking. I mean, I just couldn't escape the suicidal thoughts, and I thought, like, if I kill myself, everybody will, not everybody, but my family will get a lot of sympathy. Oh, it's so sad, whatever. If I went out and used heroin to avoid killing myself, like, everybody's going to hate me. And
Yeah.
that's the stigma of suicide and mental health. Like, that's the disparity between drug use, and addiction, and suicide. I mean, that's a really sad state of affairs.
I mean, again, it's you put it in those terms, and it's like it's so shockingly obvious, like that. Like, why would we view it that way? Like you said, sympathy for one outcome, shame and derision for the other when it's the same root problem.
Yeah,
It's
it,
insane.
it,
It's
it really is. I mean, I think, like, I guess I've believed these things and felt them for since I was 16. I'm 45, so like I've been cultivating these views for a long time. But I didn't have the, like, self awareness and introspection, or even the ability to you know let these words come out of my mouth, until fairly recently. So and we're so subjected to these societal stigmas and stuff. Like, I don't know if everybody. I mean, I bought into the idea that I'm a bad person. I'm a junkie. This is why I'm doing this stuff. So I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if most people also experience that. But as public perception shift, as people become more comfortable, or even if you say to, like, somebody's family, when they say, like, what do I do? It's like, well, do you want your kid to be alive and feel better, or do you want to shame the shit out of them so they jump off a roof? Like, what's your objective here? Nobody's going to say, I want my kid to jump off a roof. So all right, so then here are your options. Like, let's be realistic about this, because this idea of, like, just say no and you're a bad person and all of that, like, is that helpful? Like, does putting somebody in jail because they're taking drugs to feel better, is that going to make them feel, oh, I don't need drugs, like, jail made me feel so spectacular, I'm never going to no.
Yeah. It's I mean, yeah, it makes perfect sense to me, and it's like I hope that attitudes are shifting. It feels like attitudes are shifting. I think we got like 10, 15 minutes here maybe, and then I got to let you go, but I want to just quickly, what do you think then, for treatment? How do we change the conversation around that? Like we talked about this sort of abstinence only model, this again, very black and white. You're either an addict or you're not. You're sober or you're not. How do we change that? I mean, there's a whole thing that I wish we had time to go into about like just the model behind that. You mentioned briefly that people don't have medical qualifications. Like this is a kind of can be a for-profit venture, and
Yeah,
it's just a weird,
it's
system.
is insane. I mean, it's been so siloed off from the medical field. The disregard of science and evidence in addiction is, like nothing else. I mean, it's truly the Middle Ages, for the most part. And so, I mean, I feel like there's certainly enough studies, and Gem. I mean, I'm not talking about conspiracy theories here and, like, my crazy ass opinions. Like, these are facts.
Mhm.
Abstinence-based treatment is now associated with an increased risk in death, overdose, relapse. Study after study, it's consistent, mountain of evidence, right? Buprenorphine and methadone are proven to dramatically reduce death, relapse, and overdose, and so they save lives. They're much less accessible than the one that will kill you, so we need to change that, clearly. And I mean, I think it really just starts with, like, recognizing the science. I mean, like, let's let's do what works. Like we know what works. Why don't we get behind that? And even with, everything from prevention to treatment to policy. Like, I mean, we know that every legal substance is safer than anything illicit. I mean, so if you're not going to stop people from using drugs because they've been using drugs forever, I mean humans, why wouldn't we make drugs safer? Why wouldn't we offer the treatment that works to more people? I mean, right now in America, like fentanyl, the fentanyl analogs are in everything. Like you can't get cocaine anymore without being tainted with fentanyl. So, and you can get it delivered to any address in under 24 hours. So if I can get, deadly amounts of heroin delivered to, anywhere, but there's a 6 month waiting list for the methadone clinic and you have to go to the clinic every day and I can get the fentadope delivered to my house, what am I going to do? I mean, we have to, the antidote needs to be more like, it's just logic, make it more accessible than, the poison. Um, and it really just takes if we didn't moralize this, these answers would be so obvious. The treatment is less accessible than the poison. Well, shit, let's change that.
Hmm.
But lawmakers have to really get outside of that. I mean, harm reduction is being debated in America right now. We're debating whether to reduce harm. I mean, what the fuck? Like, bike accidents might hurt your head, so we're not going to give you a helmet because bikes are dangerous. Like that's the mentality. I mean, like in multiple states right now, there's uh, legislation about access to Narcan, needle exchange programs, safe injection sites. Nobody has ever died in a safe injection site, right? Ever, but we don't want them. Okay,
Hmm.
and we need them because you don't know how strong the drugs are that you're using. So like they're a necessary thing because we refuse to legalize, and then we go, well, shit, we're not going to give you this other thing. So we keep pushing them down. And if it was truly anything, I mean, like we don't have a problem with gun locks. We know guns are like when something's dangerous, we find ways to make it less dangerous. With drugs, we're like, fuck that. These guys deserve to die. Forget it. And it really just takes lawmakers to have a backbone and get outside of the moral, bullshit and say, you know what? I care more about saving lives. These laws are stupid. They are. I mean, if our drug policy had anything to do with health or safety, we would stick a crate of dynamite in it and start over. I mean, we
Hmm.
couldn't have designed a better system from prevention, treatment to policy that is more deadly than we have right now.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, it's hopeful to see that some places are making the change. Places that have typically dealt with these things for a long time. I know from my Canadian background, the West Coast, Vancouver, they're doing things they're trying to do things that are different. But it took things getting so bad. But then I see, the next province over, my home province of Alberta, getting rid of safe injection sites because again this idea that, well, we don't want these people, we don't want them around, and it's just it's yeah it's there's still some work to be done, I guess. So then I'll just we can sort of wrap it up here. I wish we had more time. It's a great conversation. um Maybe you could just any advice you want to give to anyone that might be dealing with this kind of thing, and then let us know about how people can follow you, get the book The Weight of Air, when it's coming out, all that kind of stuff,
Okay,
Twitter, whatever it is.
sure. All right, so I'm David the Kick on Twitter. On Instagram, I'm David underscore the Kick. On Facebook, I'm David.poses or davidposes.author. Everything's on my website, which is davidposes.com. Um, the book's coming out on July 7th or July 6th, sorry. Pre-orders are on Amazon, pretty much anywhere you want to buy a book, you can get it. Um, I mean, really like to kind of distill the advice down to, it's kind of, essence. I think there's something to be said for the golden rule. How would you want to be treated if you were in this spot? you're struggling with something, you're really ashamed. Do you want somebody telling you you're a fucking asshole and you don't deserve help? Would you want to get arrested? Would you want some understanding if you lied about something that you were really ashamed of and you broke the law? I mean, it's like these basic questions that I think if anybody just stopped and turned it around on themselves, they would go, you know what, I wouldn't want to be treated this way.
Makes perfect sense to me. Thank you so much. I think it's great what you're out here doing, letting people know about this. I think it's something that, like as you say, the evidence is irrefutable. There's scientific evidence behind this stuff that we need a shift in how we deal with this thing and how we view these things. So I'm hopeful that that's happening. I'm glad that people like you are out there sharing their experience and getting this message out there. So you're welcome back to anytime you got something new that you want to talk about, or whatever. So please be in touch whenever you want,
Thank you.
if and when you want to do that.
Thank you. I would be happy to. This is great. It's great to meet you. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks.
There we have it again. Big thanks to David for being on the show. Please do check out his website, davidposes.com, where you can get all of the details on how to follow him on social media. Pre-order The Weight of Air. Definitely worth it. Definitely a great book and great message. You know the drill, people. Give us a follow, rate, subscribe anywhere you're getting your podcasts. We would really appreciate it. We are available to be reached out to on Twitter and Instagram at 2bradforyou. Send us an email. We'll read everything. We'll put it on the show. 2bradforyou@gmail.com, and send us a voicemail. speakpipe.com/2bradforyou. That's it. That's all. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time. Stay safe, everyone. Bye for now.